I haven't put my chair out. I was going to sit down then. There was nothing to sit on. That wouldn't do me much good, would it? So, okay, rubbing your hands together. And tapping over your face. Just see how that feels. It's a very gentle movement over your face, a light movement. It's helping the circulation in your face, warming your face up a little bit. And then up over your head. I generally go a bit stronger when I go over my head, but you'll know what's sort of right for you to offer in terms of sort of the intensity of it, and the shoulder and your arm. The other side. And the upper part of your chest. Down to your belly. And then your legs. Good. Sitting back. Letting your weight drop back. Feeling the support of the chair. Your awareness of the chair will increase as you sort of allow yourself to drop back. And even that can be quite difficult. I say even that because when we come to sitting upright and standing, we want to get that sense of releasing, of letting go. But it's difficult enough here, so it's quite useful to recognize that. But one of the things to focus on is that increased sense of confidence that comes from, the chair will support you, sort of thing. Almost like we need to remind ourselves. Just place your hands on your belly for a few moments and see if you can feel the movement there with your breathing. Gentle rise as you breathe in, slowly down as you breathe out. It's not a big movement at all. It shouldn't be a big movement. But one that maybe you can feel sort of spreading up through your body, towards your chest and your ribs. And then come to the upright position. And that method of breathing is sometimes referred to as abdominal breathing, or sometimes as bellows breathing, which I think is quite an interesting term because, well, if we use a bellows to pump a fire with, what we do is we pull the handles of the bellows apart and we draw the air down into our lungs, into the bellows, and then squeeze them together. And in the same way, when we expand here, and sometimes we talk about expanding here, it creates the space that allows the lungs to fill up. We draw the air down into the lungs rather than trying to force the air into our lungs. And this is where it's very important to recognize how posture and breathing are very interlinked, because if you imagine trying to use an old pair of bellows and it's got a bit stiff, it won't be as effective. If the muscles of your belly and your chest and the sides and so on are rock hard and stiff, then it's going to be very difficult to get that expansion. If you've got a good muscle tone, then you're more likely to get it. It's one of the reasons I always say to people, go nice and gently. If the breathing works for you to focus on it, then that's great, but never force anything. But you might want to have that idea in your mind of the bellows. It kind of fits with some of the exercises that that we will do later as well. But now just again letting your weight sink, and again that feeling of letting go as your hips sink into the chair, you're more aware of the chair underneath you. And as your rib cage and your shoulders drop, hopefully more aware of this inner strength of the body continuing to support you. And it's not just a strength, but it's also a feeling of depth within your body. And we want to increasingly feel as we go through these movements and get familiar with the movements that somehow we're initiating the movement from that deeper part of the body. I know it sounds a bit kind of abstract. It's a bit difficult to describe the process. But for instance, when you start to turn your head, which we do now, if you think of sort of turning your head, then you'll just move here. But if you can initially just use that movement to take your attention down into your spine and recognize there's a little bit of movement in the muscles around the spine, the upper part of the spine, and focus on those as a way of initiating the movement, that may help. Or we can use what is, of course, a kind of classic approach in Tai Chi, that image of a resistance, because that also changes, that reprograms the body to move in a different way. So you have to imagine maybe somebody very gently just pushing against your chin, and you have to push back, not stiffen up to do it, of course. Remember, the classic image is moving through water. And then your shoulders, and the same thing. I think it's a bit more obvious here, perhaps, because as I've drawn your attention to before, we can feel movements in your ribs, we can feel movements in your upper back. So it becomes fairly obvious after a while. This isn't just sort of like your shoulders doing the movement. And going forwards, and then hands down to your sides. And so this idea of programming how your body's moving is something that we do all the time. I'm sure most of us have had the experience of going to open a door that we thought was locked and suddenly finding ourselves sort of pulling on it too hard and swinging it open, or going to pick up a bag thinking it was going to be quite heavy and sort of lifting it up quite quickly because whatever was in there somebody else has taken out. Those kind of things. Our expectations of what we're going to be doing affect how our body approaches the action. And what we're trying to develop is this smoothness, connectedness, and strength of movement that we might associate with moving through water. So that becomes the norm of how we move. And then winding around. And that approach to movement, that idea of movement, that way of moving, is one that encourages not just those qualities of flow and strength, but this sense of an internal movement, beginning to move more harmoniously. So this takes us into the realm of the idea of the energy in the body, the background of Chinese medicine and the restoration, the, the harmony of that energy, flow of that energy. Go back the other way now. And rest. So again, a nice upright stance, going forwards. And just discussing how imagery can be very important. This image of standing on the hill looking out over the valley, for instance, would be a very evocative one for us. A sort of open space, clear space, perhaps even a kind of settled quality. And so another thing that comes into play here is memory. Not simply remembering the exercises, but remembering those qualities in the exercises, and maybe times when we found those qualities elsewhere as well. We're quite subtle, complex creatures, really. This interaction of what we think of as mind and what we think of as body has a number of kind of consequences for us. Most of the time, we're simply not conscious of that. I suppose one of the things that we're doing is actually taking some kind of ownership of those processes. And then turn a little. And then in the other direction. And swinging around. And then back the other way. Good. Settle back. Raise your heel. Push out. Put the heel down, lower your toes, and gently just press as though you're trying to find the floor. And get a sense of your foot just sinking into the floor. And then on the other side. And come back to sitting. One thing I would always emphasize, I think, when I'm talking about this mind body overlap is I'm not talking about mind over matter, nor am I trying to suggest that all your problems will be solved simply if you kind of think the right way or something like that. Life is really not that simple. We can experience very real physical barriers, and it's not enough just to say, "Oh, we'll just kind of wish it away," or imagine it away, or something like that. Rather, this is about releasing the potential that exists within all of us for this interaction of mind and body. So just sitting back, hands down by your sides, and easing forwards, winding the arms around as you go, so that sort of closing of the chest. Earlier, when I was talking about the bellows breathing, I said that you'll find that some movements lend themselves to this quite well. And this Could be one of those movements because as you come back here, there's a natural sort of opening here that you may extend down into your belly and the opposite way here. And an appropriate breathing pattern, if you wanted to try it, would be in breath as you come back, out breath as you go forwards. As always, do not force the breathing patterns. What I would suggest is, as I go through and mention some of the breathing, try it just a couple of times, just to sort of see how it feels. And then over a period of time, you'll find that breath, movement, and posture will really harmonize. So this time we're going to go into fisherman cast and net, and you come back. And again, this would be a breath. And like with the bellows, it's as though you're breathing out through your arms. What I normally do with the breathing is I don't think about it all the time, but I just sort of check in with it. And generally speaking, when I do that, I'm doing the sort of correct breathing, as it were. And so I just assume that in between, that's what's happening. As long as I'm still breathing, that's the main thing, isn't it? And then coming over again with that expansion in particularly in the front of your body here. Remember, you're coming back to this very kind of almost lofty positioning in the upper body, but your hips still sinking down. Make sure that your chin still tucks in, and what that will do is bring this point, the fontanelle, right at the top of the head. That will bring that to the very top of the body. It will be right at the peak. And in fact, that point just between the tips of the ears on the center line of the skull is it's an acupuncture point, often used for, well, very rarely does it get needle, but you often use it, you press it to sort of, I suppose, to kind of wake people up a little bit, you could say. It's got two names. It's either referred to as the Heavenly Gate, or my favourite name is to refer to it as the Raven's Peak. And I think that has that again, that very tall, lofty quality about it, which I find very useful. But just take a moment, this time we're going to change. The pigeon spreads its wings, but when you're here, don't just come straight forwards. Give yourself just that split second to feel that, and then go forwards. After a while, you'll recognize that in going forwards, you've still got that sort of lengthening. It's just angled. So you're not bending your back or dropping your head down or anything like that. You're keeping that long feeling through your body, that strong feeling through your back. It's just you're going slightly forwards, still feeling more, in fact, the support of your legs for that feeling. and then pushing the wave. One more time. And punch with both wrists. Lightly, loosely rolling your fingers in. And then back to pigeon spreads its wings and the last three movements in a little sequence. Just remind yourself of that feeling of resistance, however you imagine it. Just do one more round. Change. Change again. With the expansion from the center of your body, pushing down through your hips and your feet, pushing up through your back and your arms, and then contracting down. Maybe with or just separate from the rhythm of the breathing. But eventually you'll find that your whole body seems to resonate and sort of pulse with this rhythm. And you start to get that almost massaging quality building up. One more time. Hands out to your sides. And parting the clouds. Now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So this familiar set of movements begin to take on a certain depth, I think, with that familiarity that allows for playing with things like imagery and uh, just taking your attention deeper in your body in one way or another. And very much trying to be aware of how your body's responding right now. We change from day to day, from week to week. Sometimes you might have a bit of an ache in the shoulder, other times it might not be there, and so on and so forth. So if you're paying attention that closely, the, the actual experience, the living experience of an exercise like this is never the same from day to day, week to week. Never exactly the same. There's always differences. Let's do one more on each side. Both hands together. This time with the turning. One more round of this. And then scooping the sea and looking at the sky. And change. Grasping the tiger's ears. Another movement with a very interesting image, this very bold quality, is a bold act, I suppose. It's nice, sort of long feeling, broad feeling, stronger feeling in your back, and you're looking between the hands. So you're looking the tiger in the eyes. One more time. And then switch over. And then changing. One more time. I always think when with grasping the tiger's ears, when I think of that image of grasping the tiger's ears, of a, a Japanese folk tale that I saw uh, done as a kind of live puppet shows. But it was very nicely done, um, and the story is a very simple one. It's set in Japan, and of course, the image of the Japanese buildings with these very thin sort of paper walls. And that was an important part of the story. A story of a little boy who every night he went to bed was frightened by this big shadowy thing that looked like a tiger creeping up on him, and this went on, and it was quite a long, involved story, like a lot of these stories. But in the end, what he did one day was he got out of bed and went to see what was going on, and it turned out there was a little cat walking along, but it had a light behind it, and so its shadow when it reached the paper wall was quite big. So sort of the moral of the story was this idea that the little boy managed to face his fears, as it were, and it turned out to be a fluffy little cat, not a big fierce tiger. Um, I remember when I saw that performance, it reminded me of this kind of boldness of grasping the tiger's ears. I'm not claiming that that's a traditional image, by the way. I don't know whether that's what's behind the image of grasping the tiger's ears or where that comes from, but it's just something that kind of reminds me of it. So just coming back to sitting, and give yourself a few moments. In this position, we often refer to this as central equilibrium. So we've obviously got the physical posture, but also that sense of standing on the hill, standing the Ravens Peak, whatever it is, of a very open posture that isn't strained. And I think this is quite important. We've got the physical elements of the posture, but these almost psychological aspects as well. And this is a useful thing to come back to, especially on those days when, I mean, it's quite bright at the moment. We were saying earlier, it's quite difficult to get up at the moment, isn't it? We're getting some dark grey mornings, and you feel a bit kind of like that when that happens. And it's no good trying to sort of like force yourself to be awake. That's just not going to work. But we can sort of encourage ourselves back to this more open, upright quality with a combination of good posture, rooting down, and so on, and these different kind of images. It's just a very subtle change that helps to rejuvenate us a little. Now go back to just moving forwards and backwards and feeling your weight moving. And then by turning in your hips and your waist, bringing your head and your shoulders around in a small circle. Generally speaking, shoulders and head won't extend beyond the limits of the stance. So you've got this square stance here, your hips and your feet forming the corners of the square. And especially to begin with, you don't want your head to go over that boundary. What you might find is as you get closer to that boundary and you just become a little bit aware of things stiffening up a little bit, you've got two choices at that point. You can either just come back from that, which is a good choice because that keeps the flow of the movement going. But at other times you might try, I can get out to here and I'm just beginning to stiffen up here. And if I can just sink down a little bit more, sometimes I can release that so I can get that little bit more movement. And that's also quite a useful thing to do. Change direction. When you do this, the feeling in your spine is lovely, and indeed your rib cage. And I've used this image before of a plant supported by and floating in water. And if you go too far, you'll lose that support. So that's when the straining will set in. And then one hand, letting the hand follow the movement. And especially at the beginning again, your hand is out there, but it doesn't really move any further. But in the same way as we did with shoulders and head, we can begin to get a little bit more movement, which is basically your arm growing out of your shoulder, extending out from your shoulder and coming back. The circular part of it is provided by the hips and the waist. So essentially, if I were to stop moving in the hips and the waist, that would be what my hand is doing. It's going forwards and backwards. But because I add the turning in, it becomes a circle. It's about hip height. So it's just a little bit above your legs. And then try on the other side. So this is a nice movement in the arm, just gently extending out, feeling that the shoulder joint and your elbow joint and your wrist joints of the fingers just to expand very slightly. So it's not just the muscles, but the whole of your arm, right into the bones, seems to just grow a little bit. Just be aware of the spaces between your fingers and between your thumb and forefinger. The hands are held in a slightly curved fashion, not stiff. And if you imagine your hand just resting on a ball, what you've done is you've just let the hand sort of touch the ball as much as possible. And then we're going to change and stir in the beans. So your arms are going forwards and backwards. Your weight, not so much now, more kind of turning movement. There will be some movement of the weight, of course, because turning in the body will move your weight both forwards and backwards and side to side. You don't need to make that happen. Try not to think in terms of coordinating your arms. Coordinating the arms would imply that they're doing two different things that you have to somehow synchronize. But actually it's one movement from the center of your body. And although we're angling out a little bit, we've moved away from that central point, that point of central equilibrium, we still enjoy some of the qualities of it. So now just come back and rest in that position again. So this is your reference point. And we move out of that in various ways, of course, in one way or another. But it's as though you're still connected with it. And so you retain those qualities of openness. It's like if I go forwards, I sometimes imagine almost like a pole going up behind me that I'm attached to by an elastic band. Or if I do, we didn't do it today, but if I were to do something like hitting a ball in front of the shoulder, there's that pole behind me, and I can only go so far before it pulls me back. So give yourself a chance to once again just really experience this. It becomes very important when we're standing. Now just rub your hands together and tap it over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder, again your arm, the other side, chest, belly, and your legs. Then stand. So just beginning to let your weight roll forwards and backwards. So we pass through that point of central equilibrium. Let me just show you something here. You can see, you can perhaps see it easier this side. But if when I stand in central equilibrium, I imagine that pole there, and I go forwards, I can only go so far before I stumble. So even though I'm not upright anymore, and I might even be doing something like, I don't know, rowing a boat, for instance, there is still that awareness of central equilibrium. And it's like a boat when it's moored to a post, that the boat may move away from that post, but it will always get drawn back to it. And so an awareness of central equilibrium, that depending where your weight is and so on and so forth, becomes very important to stop us. The mooring post stops the boat being blown onto the rocks, sort of thing. And it's not that we're stuck in that position by any means, but it's there in the back of our minds. Bring your hands out a little bit. So swaying in the river. And hopefully by now you're getting a sense of where it's appropriate for your weight to be. All of these different subtle elements of posture contribute to and are part of the whole picture of central equilibrium. And it's central equilibrium that allows that spaciousness, that movement, so on and so forth. So this time, letting your weight come to rest behind the balls of your feet or wherever is the right place for you, sinking down. So what you may notice in this or some of the other movements is there are points where you start to, again, lose that connection, lose those qualities in the body. That might be because you've gone too far. So you might want to just make it a slightly smaller movement. Might just be because you've stiffened up for no obvious reason. And if you can recognize that, you might be able to just release that. Might be that, for instance, one thing that can be very common with this exercise is that we stop moving in the legs. It just becomes this. And so the whole, there's a strain in the upper part of the body. The thing that we notice first tends to be just a loss of the quality within the body, the movement, the sensations within your body. And again, our memory of those sensations may be the thing that help to restore them. But they will also be the thing that sort of points out to us that, oh, you're starting to lose it again. The very nature of the movement, though, you push up, I'm more likely to get a bit stiff as I push up, but the movement brings me back down. So there's a rhythm within the movement where we sort of re-establish that central equilibrium before we move out again. And then the wild goose. So that process, reaching out, extending out, which is important, of course, and then coming back and sort of touching base, as it were, is something that we want to stay with us out of the sessions, so that we begin to recognise when we're washing up, when we're walking down the road or whatever, that there are points where we lose that equilibrium in both mind and body. And that's just quite natural, really. know, it somehow wouldn't be right. I mean, you could perhaps maintain it if you locked yourself away in a room, but who wants to do that? But we can come back to it. And then part in the clouds. Good. 1 foot forwards. For me, a good point to re-establish central equilibrium is in that moment of settling in properly to each foot. Chances are somewhere in between in the process of moving and changing, I will lose it. And then your arms and your hands following fisherman cast a net. Hopefully, you will also begin to recognize how far is appropriate to go at any particular point. Rather than getting to a point and think, oh, I've gone too far, to recognize that point where you're about to go too far. And once again, we do this all the time in our lives. If you drive a car, you kind of know when to change gear usually. If you ride a bike, or there's all sorts of little kind of intuitive senses when we're approaching a point of change, when the kettle's about to boil, or just when the toast is done, or something like that. Just all sorts of things. Shake out. So once again, this is quite normal, if you like, for human beings. Now just going forwards and backwards. And your arms following. One more time. Shake out. Go back to your chair. Before we do embrace tiger, return to the mountain, just going back to, well, really combining to today's themes, which is, the the idea of perhaps being aware of the breathing, but also the use of imagery. When we breathe in, we tend to, if you pay attention to the breath, we often feel a kind of sharper quality in the breath. The out breath tends to be warmer and a bit murkier, really. We're expelling the carbon dioxide from our lungs for one thing. One rather nice image for that is that the in breath is labelled as the spring mist. When, if you can remember that, some time ago now. But in the spring, April, May, those sharp, clear, misty mornings, quite cold but quite refreshing. The out breath is related to the autumn fog. Kind of like we're getting a bit of that, aren't we? A little bit murkier, and again with that kind of tired, stagnant quality associated with it. So the in breath and the out breath can represent a change from the autumn fog to the spring mist. And just try a few rounds of this in conjunction. Very simple exercise. Imagine holding your hands in front of you. So if you can do this with the breathing, great. If not, just get a sense of your body filling up or expanding. Again, like the bellows. So push your hands out, feel the expansion in your body, feel your body filling up. The image of the spring mist, and then releasing, possibly with the out breath, the autumn fog. So just a very subtle change in mind and body, really. One that goes well with this more open posture of central equilibrium, I feel. Do this one more time. And this time, bring your hands up and going into embrace tiger, return into the mountain. One more round. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, I hope that was useful to you.
Yes, thank you
very much.
Thank you.
It's lovely.
So take